Now, while Britain says it continues to send humanitarian aid to Yemen, Save the Children has accused London of exporting fear to the children who remain under constant Saudi airstrikes. The London-based NGO criticized the government for arming and supporting countries in a conflict that is, quote, killing, maiming and starving children. Meanwhile, Britain's Shadow International Development Secretary said the NGO's report highlighted the, quote, sheer hypocrisy of delivering aid to Yemen while British-made bombs rain down. The UK has earned at least $4.24 billion from selling missiles and equipment to Saudi Arabia and its allies, which are involved in the Yemen war. British arms are said to have been used in bombing civilian targets and vital infrastructure, impeding aid access and worsening the cholera epidemic. Nearly 13,000 people have been killed since Riyadh launched its deadly offensive on its neighbor in early 2015. Joining us via Skype from Bristol is Tony Gosling. He's an investigative journalist. Many thanks for joining us here on Press TV, Mr. Gosling. Now, as we just said, the British Shadow International Development Secretary used the term sheer hypocrisy. However, there are others who are saying this is simply collusion.
Well, what the British and the Americans and the Saudi Arabians have done in Yemen is to create hell on earth for the people that live there. This is absolutely appalling conflict. It's not really even a conflict. It's more of a slaughter going on there, an atrocity being carried out day after day. If we just go back to this time last year, people may have forgotten. I'd like to remind them that there was a bomb attack by the Saudis and the British, which led to the deaths of nearly 150 people who were at a funeral. This is the sort of appalling attack that's also been taken place by NATO in Afghanistan. These funeral attacks are really some of the most hideous war crimes that anyone can possibly imagine. Of course, it's not a military target. It's not only a civilian target, but it's a bunch of people mourning. And that, remember, that's nearly 3 times the number of people that have been killed in Las Vegas just in a few days ago. So let's just remember the kind of scale and think about the media coverage that attack got. So the response of the British government to that attack and the international condemnation of it is to then supply sign another contract for £283 million worth of arms to Saudi Arabia. Quite rightly, civil society here in Britain responded to that and attempted to go to the courts to get arms sales to Saudi Arabia made illegal. And the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, who now looks, by the way, at the Conservative Party conference that's going on here in Britain, as he may well be the next Prime Minister, was the one who approved that sale, and the courts also approved it. So there is no real rule of law really in the British courts, and our name is mud around the world. In fact, along with the United States, we have become the evil empire that back in World War II we were trying to fight.
So, Mr. Gosling, then what is the way out of it? How does one hold these governments accountable for these atrocities that are taking place in Yemen, specifically at a time, as you've just said, even the judicial system isn't supporting these grassroots movements?
Well, okay, 13,000 people have been killed in Yemen since this conflict began, and that was, it's the beginning of 2015. And look, how do you hold these people to account? The only way to do it is to make their lives hell electorally. That is to say, we are making, people like Boris Johnson should always be asked by the BBC and by other journalists who have a chance to interview him. Of course, he's very choosy about who he allows to interview him. Need to make sure, and Theresa May, the Prime Minister, that these questions are always asked. But of course, the media is supine here in the West. These difficult questions are never asked. Other questions, like the millions of people in Britain who are about to be plunged into debt because of the introduction of something called universal credit, may be forced out of their homes. These questions too are not asked by our mainstream press here in Britain, and actually in a healthy democracy they would be asked, but they're not being asked. So in answer to your question, how do we change things, I think we've just got to keep plugging away at making sure that everybody in Britain and the Western world knows that these atrocities are going on British taxpayers' money. And any time there's a decision to further fund Saudi bombs, and let's not forget there's actually RAF personnel, the same people that flew Spitfires in World War II, that fought off the Nazi bombers, are now actually the Nazis themselves in many ways. They are the aggressors. They are killing civilians in foreign countries. They're actually helping with the targeting, supposedly, in Yemen. But of course that targeting has been killing thousands of civilians. So I think we've just got to keep the pressure on to the British officials, to the politicians and to the press to actually do their job, which they're not doing. Occasionally we see something about Yemen in the news here, but we need to be seeing much, much more of that, and to make the politicians that are making these decisions life much more difficult, and to stop the profiteering, as you said at the start, the billions of pounds, because Britain is becoming the arms dealer of choice for the most repressive regimes on the planet. And until we do something to stop that, this country's name will be mud.
Okay, that's Tony Gosling, investigative journalist, joining us via Skype from Bristol. Mr. Gosling, it's always a pleasure having you with us here on Press TV.
Thank you.